Welcome to this week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. I'm John Strum, and I'm the host of the Real Talk MS podcast. Each week, Real Talk MS reaches thousands of people in more than 90 countries around the world with the news that people affected by MS need to know about. My wife, Jean, lived with progressive MS for 23 years, so I've had a front row seat experiencing all the ways that MS can impact a family. Currently, I'm a member of the International Progressive MS Alliance Scientific Steering Committee. I'm a district activist leader and trustee for the National MS Society, and I chair the Society's California Government Relations Advisory Committee. I want to thank all of you who are joining us on GoToWebinar, Facebook Live, and YouTube Live. The MS Society's Ask an MS Expert webcast is designed to connect you with MS experts who are ready to answer your questions about the topics that impact people affected by MS every day. So as I chat with our expert today, please feel free to post your questions on Facebook and YouTube, or type them into the question box if you're joining us on GoToWebinar. We'll try to answer as many of your questions as we can during the Q&A portion of today's program. Not everyone living with MS develops changes in cognition. But for those that do, these changes can be challenging, frustrating, and even scary. Today, we're talking about cognitive changes in MS. We'll talk about cognitive evaluation, the impact of modifiable lifestyle behaviors on cognition, and rehabilitation interventions that will help you improve your cognitive health. Joining me for this conversation is Dr. Vicki Leavitt from Columbia University Irving Medical Center. Dr. Leavitt is a neuroscientist and neuropsychologist whose passion lies in identifying and understanding key biopsychosocial factors related to brain health and cognitive health in people with MS. In her laboratory at Columbia, Dr. Leavitt has dedicated her research to developing evidence-based treatments to protect brain health, leveraging modifiable lifestyle factors. Those are the factors that we have control over, like diet, exercise, sleep, mood, and social support. Dr. Leavitt served as chair of the Clinical, Translational, and Rehabilitation Pilot Grant Committee for the National MS Society, and she's a member of the editorial board of the journal Neurology. In 2019, Dr. Leavitt launched eSupport Health, a digital health company that provides support groups along with web-based programs and workshops that are based on the empirical research conducted by Dr. Leavitt's lab at Columbia. Welcome, Dr. Leavitt, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much, John. I'm really thrilled to be here with you.
You know, the change in cognitive function is common in MS. In fact, more than half of all the people living with MS may experience problems with cognition at some point during their disease course. I guess a good place to start is asking you to define cognitive function for us.
It's a great place to start. So the simple answer is cognition is all of the mental functions that we conduct with our brains. But I think that the better and more accurate answer is cognition is our thoughts, it's our beliefs, it's our ideas and our perspectives. It's who we are. And it really encompasses, it's our memories, right? So it's everything about our identity. Our thoughts are who we are. And I think that that's really important and key to state at the very beginning of this, because it's a really sensitive topic and it's a really important topic. And anything that threatens our cognition threatens our very sense of self and how we see ourselves in the world as we relate to other people.
Absolutely. I'm wondering which cognitive functions are more likely to be affected by multiple sclerosis?
Right, and that's a good question, because so many can be, but not everyone experiences cognitive changes, first of all, at all, as you mentioned, but for those who do, it can be a very varied bag of differences and changes. I reflect on the types of things that my patients have told me, and what they tend to come in the door saying most of the time is something like, I'm more forgetful, or I'm just not as sharp as I used to be. A lot of them describe feeling like they can't keep everything going the way they used to, or if they're engaged in a task and they get interrupted, they can't go back to where they were before. Just last week, I saw a patient who said to me, I just feel like I have so many tabs open. And I thought that was such a great analogy because I could picture it. And I could, I could feel the way she feels overwhelmed by that. It's like overwhelming. But for me, the most important thing after that patient says to me, the issue is I'm forgetful. The most important thing is to say, can you give me an example? Because that's when we start to really get to the heart of it. So one patient might say, yeah, so for example, when I'm in the middle of a sentence, sometimes I just forget what I was saying and I can't find the word. So all of a sudden, what I'm thinking about is actually expressive language issues, which are very prevalent in MS. But it's not the way we think as human beings. Nobody ever arrived in my office and said, Doc, I'm having expressive language issues or rapid automatized naming issues. So, we have to kind of get to the heart of the matter. And that's a lot of what the cognitive evaluation that you and I are going to talk about has to do with getting to the heart of the matter.
Well, when I'm looking at the slide that's on the screen, I see a variety of different kinds of cognitive functions. I'm wondering, should someone who's experiencing cognitive changes expect to have multiple functions impacted?
So I think it's very important to know that the answer to that question is no. And the reason for a cognitive evaluation is to sort through and see. We all have a profile of strengths and weaknesses. And that's the most important thing I think to think about as you come in for an evaluation. This isn't like you're going to pass or fail. This is let's get to the bottom of what your strengths and weaknesses are so that we can help you play to your strengths and downplay your weaknesses.
Lee has written in, and Lee has concerns about not feeling as smart as he was before he was diagnosed with MS. Are things like intellect likely to change because of MS?
So it's kind of a funny one because by definition, the way we think of and conceptualize intelligence is a stable, lifelong trait. So that is, if I administered an IQ test to you when you were 5 years old, the score you would achieve on that test would be highly predictive of how you're going to do for the rest of your life. Even into your oldest years, and even in sort of the initial stages of dementia, because dementia and those things that change our brain tend to affect the various capacities that fluctuate over the life course. And basically, I'm talking about memory. Memory is the big one that fluctuates. Memory fluctuates with age. It fluctuates in regards to stressful circumstances, particularly pregnancy, trauma. COVID-19, I think, is causing a lot of changes in memory for all of us, not just the people who got COVID. And I'll come back to that later. But I don't think that our friend should worry about his intellect changing. And it's not that he's getting less smart, but there may be some changes among the various constituent domains of processing. And again, that gets to the reason or the justification for having an evaluation that can help us get to exactly what is it that's changing.
What about the timing of cognitive changes? Can they occur anytime during the disease course?
They can. And, John, I'm thinking to myself about, you had Megan Byer on here a couple of times last year, and she did such an excellent and comprehensive job of laying out a lot of research around these kinds of questions. What I want to present as a caveat to the research that we know is that a lot of that research took place before the era of DMTs. We are in a new world, and it's really, really heartening to see how much DMTs are bringing us towards controlling disease progression. And those beneficial effects do transfer to cognition. So while cognition can be affected at any stage of MS, in answer to your question, I think we need to be careful and temper our answers with the fact that there's still a big unknown here. which is to what degree our DMT is going to be changing the answer to this question as we learn more and more about them.
And what about MS subtypes? To what degree do they impact the level or the severity of cognitive changes? Does it depend on whether someone might have relapsing remitting MS and someone else may have progressive MS?
So it's a mixed bag, right? We can see somebody early in a course of relapsing remitting MS with severe cognitive changes, for instance, but that would be unusual. It would be more expected to see somebody further along in their disease course and in progressive MS with worse cognitive deficits. Although again, couched in the idea that this is mostly research that we know from pre-DMT times. And also it's important to remember that these disease stages track pretty closely with aging. So the story for all of us, whether we have MS or not, is that it's not really a good picture, right? We all want to combat cognitive decline because it's happening to, if anybody on this call isn't aging, they can let me know, but I think we're all aging together. And so what that means is that our brains have to work against that natural process, that natural decline.
What about actual lesions? For instance, is cognitive dysfunction related to either the number of lesions or where lesions are located when you look at an MRI scan?
So definitely there is a correspondence between how much disease burden you have, whether that's lesion load, atrophy. What we do is we take those neural markers of disease burden and we look to how much variance is explained in your cognitive function. So we quantify how much disease you have, and then we make a prediction. Based on this is how your cognition will look. Well, those models are very imprecise because there's a huge amount of variance that's not explained, meaning that correlation is very weak. And what that means is that this huge amount of space, which is the unknown, is what is contributing to your cognitive health, right? Let's flip this around. Let's not say what's contributing to your cognitive decline, but what's protecting you? So, if lesions are telling this much of the story, what's telling the rest of the story? And we'll get to that later when we talk about the modifiable lifestyle factors, which are sort of my favorite thing.
In your experience working with people living with MS, do cognitive changes occur spontaneously? In other words, could someone wake up one day and experience a significant decline in their cognitive health?
I think that would be rather unusual. It's not how we generally see the progression of cognitive changes. Cognitive changes in MS, for better or for worse, tend to be very insidious, very slow moving. And what that means is, well, on the one hand, it's good news. It's not an overnight thing, right? You don't wake up one morning and you have a different brain than you went to sleep with. But the problem with the insidiousness of it is that it leaves the person who's experiencing it feeling very unsure. Like, is this real? Am I imagining this? Like, I just don't feel as sharp as I used to, but maybe it's all in my head. I can't tell you the number of times people have said to me, is this real or is it all in my head? And my answer to that invariably is, insofar as your brain is inside your head, it is inside your head. It is all in your head. But I think it's important to listen to that inner voice. You know yourself and you know your brain. And if you feel that something is off, you don't have to really think further than that. You can act on that, and you can talk to your doctor. You can talk to, you can reach out and find resources to explore that, as scary as that can be.
You've reminded us that things like aging, trauma, these are things that can impact anyone's memory. I'm wondering about MS symptoms specifically. Can symptoms like fatigue, depression, or maybe other changes in mood, can these things themselves impact cognition?
Well, they're certainly related. And so I'm glad you asked this question. First, I'm going to put fatigue aside for a minute because it's a whole other animal. But we do a lot of work in my lab looking at depression and anxiety. And we do look at them separately. And that's actually a little bit more novel than you might imagine, given that they both have a very high prevalence in MS. But very often they're lumped together. Well, we know that depression and anxiety are two very different things, two very different physiological states, right? They often get lumped together. In my lab, we've been doing work to look at how one or the other is related to different and distinct patterns of cognitive changes. And this is very helpful, I think, because it gets us towards precision targeted treatments. Now, we're not there yet, but I think that if we can start to understand how these various factors interact with each other, it can be a very useful way to approach treatment. And also, I always emphasize to patients that if there is something like depression or anxiety going on coincidentally with cognitive changes, we should certainly treat those, because we do have treatments for those, very good and very effective treatments. So it can be something that patients are resistant to. They came in for a cognitive evaluation and finding out that maybe they should be going on some pharmacological treatment for mood is my suggestion to them. But I always say, look, we need to put ourselves on the most stable footing that we can so that we can then work to fix the other things or to accommodate the other things. We have very good treatments. For the things that we have good treatments for, that should be our first line of defense.
As in so many other health-related kinds of treatment scenarios, early recognition, early assessment, and early treatment are important because cognitive changes can have a real impact on a person's quality of life, their relationships, their activities, their employment, as you pointed out at the beginning of this conversation, on their very self-image. So what are the first signs of cognitive dysfunction?
Well, again, I think only we can know, we ourselves, I, me, you. It's very hard sometimes to measure the subtle changes that occur in MS. And I think that that's a pretty important message. Listen to yourself and listen to others. And that's another question that I ask people when they end up in my office, which is, has anybody around you mentioned any changes? Because sometimes others see things in us that we don't see for ourselves. And that can be helpful. Alternately, if the answer to that question is no, nobody else senses this, but I know it and I feel it, and then that's important to know too. These are really important pieces of clinical information.
Well, before we continue our discussion, I want to take just a moment to welcome those of you who've continued to join us on GoToWebinar, Facebook Live, and YouTube Live. Please let us know what's on your mind. Post your comments and questions on Facebook and YouTube, or type them into the question box if you're joining us on GoToWebinar. MS navigators are also online throughout today's program, answering questions and providing resources to you. By the way, our Ask an MS Expert live event takes place at this same time every Friday. So please help us make sure that everyone knows about it by sharing news about the webcast with your family and friends and posting it to your social channels. Dr. Leavitt, evidence supports the benefit of cognitive screening and evaluation for people with MS, but often cognitive function isn't openly discussed, it's not routinely evaluated, so it's not always optimally treated. So if someone's concerned about cognitive dysfunction, what can they do? How should they start the conversation with their doctor or MS specialist?
I think, first of all, being armed with knowledge is our best approach to everything in life. So when we talk to our doctors, we want to say, look, I understand that cognition can be affected in MS, and I'd like to know what we should be thinking about at this stage. A screening is very useful early on, or at any point, or along the way, periodically, to see a trajectory. The kind of comprehensive evaluation that a neuropsychologist would do that would take several hours may not be warranted in every situation. But getting the conversation started with your doctor is the first place. And I would say in the 10 years that I've been studying cognition and MS, we have come a really incredibly long way. I get a little email blast every week of papers that have just been published with the words cognition and MS. It used to have 1 or 2. Now it has 30 or 40. So it's really a burgeoning field. And I think that most MS neurologists out there at this point are fully aware, they have cognition on their radar. So if they're not bringing it up with you, bring it up with them and explore it together from there.
Well, since you just mentioned cognitive evaluations, Jerome wrote in to share that he was recently referred for a cognitive evaluation, but he doesn't know much about it. So who typically administers the evaluation, and what can Jerome expect?
Great. It's interesting because every patient who walks into my office doesn't seem to know what to expect, and that's what I expect. So the first thing I do is I explain to them what's going to happen. It's a neuropsychologist who usually administers the cognitive tests, although I think at some centers we have different personnel doing that, different practitioners. For me, my evaluation takes about 2 hours. I don't want it to be exhaustive, and I do want it to be value added. And I'm also very sensitive, just really going right back to the top of our interview, John, to the fact that this is a very delicate thing to confront, right? I'm reaching in and I'm touching your very soul when I test your cognition. And a lot of people find it incredibly difficult to confront that. It's really scary. So if you're in my office, you're really brave. You're confronting something that's not easy. And I want to make it as comfortable as it can be. So you need to know that this isn't a pass-fail situation. I'm going to interview you to find out everything about you that is related to your cognitions, going back to the things that you asked me about before: fatigue, depression, anxiety, but also these modifiable lifestyle factors that we're going to dig into. I know more, but I want to know about your exercise habits. I want to know about your sleep. I want to know about your diet, and I want to know about your social support. So those are all the questions that I'm going to be asking you about when we sit down and talk. And after we've had that time together, I'm going to administer some paper and pencil tests, which brings more people to the sort of anxiety-provoking aspect of the evaluation. But I do like to provide feedback along the way and help people understand what I'm testing. The whole thing should be value added for you. And if it's not, then consider finding a different practitioner. It's really something that I don't want patients to leave feeling defeated and upset by, because I know that can be the result of a neuropsychological evaluation. It should help you understand yourself better. Everything we do in life should.
Brings me to my very next question. It's from Mia. And Mia wants to know what a cognitive evaluation can actually show. What do you learn?
Right. So for me, it's all about patterns. I'm going to be looking for patterns. I want to understand what your strengths and weaknesses are, as I mentioned before, and whether, for example, it looks as though it might be related to an ancillary cause, whether it might be. So most patients who sit down in front of me say, I'm wondering if this is real, if it's MS, or if it's aging. And my answer is yes. There's certainly overlap of all these things going on. And then in addition, there's how did you sleep last night? How do you sleep in general? How's your depression level? How's your social support? All of those things. So I'm going to bring all of that information together, and I'm going to try to formulate a profile of you that helps us both understand what there is here that we can actually act upon. Where's the low-hanging fruit, or where's the point of entry where we can work towards getting you towards a more optimal level of function and performance.
Should someone with MS who's experiencing cognitive changes expect to have only one of these cognitive evaluations, or is this something that is going to be repeated over time?
So that's really up to you. In general, as a sort of standard sentence at the end of every report I write, I say, I will look forward to seeing you in 3 to 5 years, which is a long, wide range, or sooner if acute changes are noted. So if you wake up one morning and, something has changed, we want to see you, and we have your baseline. So that's the important thing. That's your money in the bank. You come in and you say, I think something has changed. Well, I'll be able to answer that question really well if I've got that baseline. But in general, we don't see cognition change so quickly that it would warrant coming back at closer intervals than, say, 3 to 5 years.
Cognitive tests, some of them are available online, but they aren't necessarily approved by healthcare providers. Do you recommend these kinds of online self-assessments?
Truly, I don't know what they are, and this terrifies me. Please don't do that. I don't know what they are. It really, I mean, the thing is, being able to help you understand the results and interpret the findings is a very big part of what I do. And, you know, I think that if I were, well, when I present scores to a patient and they see that they scored, for instance, in the 60th percentile, patients sometimes say to me, is that like an F? Well, no, absolutely not. So, you know, I don't know what these online things are being offered, but it worries me a little bit. You know, some knowledge is good and some knowledge is scary if it's not good knowledge. So I would just caution everybody. I know that everybody out there is Googling like crazy to get answers, but we have to be careful. We have to be careful about what we stumble upon and how we interpret it ourselves.
Well, I feel like I should reassure you that I'm not here to scare you, and I promise not to do it again. But I'll just ask this. In your opinion, should professionally administered cognitive screening and evaluations be part of a comprehensive MS care plan?
You know, it's an interesting one. And what I'm going to say is, realistically, given the constraints of our medical system, it will be great for everybody to get a screener, a quick screener. But to say that every patient needs a comprehensive evaluation, I don't think it's warranted. If we had 5 treatments for cognition, or even one that was FDA approved or accepted and widely approved, or had the evidence underpinning it to support its efficacy, that would be a different story, but we don't. We're not there yet. And so to put every single patient through a comprehensive evaluation, if they're not complaining about cognition or worried about cognition, I can't actually get behind that idea. Screeners would be great. Screeners tell us who, you know, do we need to investigate further? And there's a great screening instrument that takes 90 seconds. So if I could give that to every patient in the clinic, absolutely.
You know, cognitive dysfunction is one of the major reasons that people with MS leave the workforce. Julie wrote in and mentioned that changes in cognition are starting to affect her work. She's nervous about getting a cognitive evaluation because she doesn't want her employer to know the results. Can you share with us who has access to the results of these evaluations?
Sure. So it becomes a part of your electronic, you know, health chart, medical chart, medical record, and it's HIPAA protected. It's private. You share it with whom you choose or not. It is a touchy matter in the workplace, and despite the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act, there can be real-world repercussions. So it is something that we have to think carefully about, helping patients protect that aspect of their disease, and it comes up a lot. It's actually something that we've been studying in my lab, and I'm also very passionate about, which is this issue of disclosure and concealment around MS diagnosis, the spheres in which we choose to share that we have MS, and how there may be consequences to that. This is something that I think really affects a lot of people with MS, but is almost never discussed in the clinic setting. So I think it kind of goes back to this question about what can the professional ramifications of this be for me? And I think it's a conversation we need to open up.
For those who leave the workforce early, how can a cognitive evaluation help support someone who may be applying for Social Security disability?
This is a really good one. I mean, this is a really pragmatic point, and this is something I like to say to patients who are ambivalent about coming in for this evaluation and, well, do I really need this right now? And I always say, you know what? We get the baseline and we have it. And then in a few years, if you come back to me and you say, I don't know, I feel like something's changed, we can find out. Now, if I've never seen you before and you say, I feel like something's changed, I have a number of different ways to tease out whether it has. But none of it is as good as having a baseline on you from 3 years ago. So if we have that, it can be a very good way of making a case for you, should you ever need to, that you've actually declined, which is not our hope for anyone. But if we need to show that, we may be able to if we have that baseline.
Now that we have a better understanding of MS-related cognitive changes and how they're evaluated, let's talk about interventions to better manage cognitive health. If a cognitive evaluation shows significant decline or cognitive deficits, what services or resources might someone be referred to?
So this is a tricky one because there are a lot of options out there, but I'm very cautious and I'm very conservative with my patients. And I don't make recommendations about things that I don't see a sufficient level of empirical evidence supporting. So there are, for instance, occupational therapists who can work with you to make very pragmatic kinds of recommendations, and cognitive rehabilitation specialists who will help you accommodate the kinds of challenges and struggles that you're having. There are also, for example, executive dysfunction coaches, which I think in theory is a beautiful idea. The truth of the matter is there are very few of them, and most of them charge exorbitant amounts of money. And that's really unfortunate because a lot of people could benefit from these folks. They have something very valuable to offer and provide. And this kind of goes to the type of person who feels like they have too many tabs open and just feels overwhelmed. So having somebody who can help you navigate that and work your way through that can be extremely useful. But again, these folks are few and far between. And I think one of the things about all the resources for folks with MS is I don't think it's the case that we don't have enough. We have an abundance, an overwhelming amount of resources. It's just very, very hard to know what's good and what's not, and what's going to help me and what's not. So with regards to cognitive interventions, I'm a little bit careful, and I prefer to focus on the things that we know affect cognition. And those are the modifiable lifestyle factors that we study in my lab. So I think we're finally, I keep dropping that, that little teaser. I think we're finally about to round the corner and get to that, John.
Well, let's get to that then. We know you have a particular interest in the impact of modifiable lifestyle factors like diet, exercise, and intellectually stimulating activities in preserving healthy cognition. So before we get into those specifically, what led you to study lifestyle factors and their impact on cognition?
So this is a very, very huge topic in the world of aging and Alzheimer's research, which, by the way, is all about cognition. In MS, cognition is like a little sliver, a little piece of the pie. In dementia, it's the whole pie, right? As it turns out, my laboratory at Columbia is housed within the cognitive neuroscience division, where every other researcher, and these are like world-renowned, huge figures, is studying aging and Alzheimer's, which is wonderful for me because I get to benefit from their knowledge and their wisdom and take what they've studied and tested in aging and Alzheimer and apply it to the MS population, where so much of it is so relevant. So I've become familiar with things like the Mediterranean diet, which is very heavily studied in aging and Alzheimer's, the benefits of exercise. Of course, all of these things are also being studied in MS, but there's much, much less. So we have a lot to learn from the work that's being done in aging and Alzheimer's. So in my lab, we've been looking at each of these factors. And before we go further, I want to say this. This term modifiable lifestyle factors is very nice, and it's a nice idea. But I want to just present the caveat that the degree to which any of these is modifiable is very strongly tied to our socioeconomic status. So I just want to make that clear, because otherwise we're sort of doing a disservice and we're glossing over something that has to be talked about, right? To say that the Mediterranean diet is good and exercising this many hours a day is good and engaging in, I mean, it's all nice. It's a nice idea. But what we have to do as a medical community is figure out to what degree people actually can incorporate these suggestions into their real lives. because otherwise we're just getting to ivory tower, and it's not, it's not doing a real service to the people who really need to benefit from this work.
So tell us a little bit about what you've learned from your research.
Great. So I think I'm gonna, John, you mentioned diet, exercise, and intellectual enrichment. That's sort of like the holy trinity of the modifiable risk factors. But I find myself drawn to yet another factor that never made that list, and it's social support. I've been fascinated by social support over the last couple of years. And it really did, actually, it came from the aging research that I was hearing about and the dementia research, because I noticed that in talk after talk that I went to and attended, I found myself wondering, do people ever ask these folks if they've recently lost their spouse, right? Or if they're all alone, or if they're isolated? Because that would probably make a big difference in everything, right? And I just found myself really drawn to this idea, and I've begun to really immerse myself in this sort of sociobiological evolutionary theories of how we're social animals and we need each other. We need each other's support, and it contributes to our very brain health. And so it's a line of research that I've begun in my lab, talking to people about it and getting anecdotal reports, like, how's your social support? One thing that I learned, that the answer to that question most of the time is, my social support's great. I have really supportive friends and family, but I feel really alone in what I'm going through. And I found this to be really heartbreaking, and something that I wasn't sure if we as a research and clinical community were quite getting at. Right? Why do people with MS have to feel so alone? Why do they have to feel so isolated in their experience? There are lots of people with MS that could connect. And if we could connect them with each other, this is the support of the community, of people who do understand what we're going through, right, is sort of, I think, a basic human need being understood. So some of the research in my lab that I began to develop was around something called e-support, which were just simple online support groups that I started running with a Zoom link like this. But back in 2017, before anybody knew what a Zoom link was, and I had to explain it to them, like by using words like Hollywood Squares, if you're old enough to know what that is, or maybe there's a new version of it now, I don't know. But then people started to know what I was talking about. But bringing people together into these online support groups, I actually started to measure the quantifiable benefits for things like depression and loneliness and see changes in those, which then infer is going to have an effect on cognition, because it's all connected. It's all going to come back. Healthy brain is healthy cognition. So that's the end game that we're looking for here with these modifiable factors.
I'm glad you brought up social support, and we know how isolating MS can feel. I'm wondering if you've seen the same sort of scenario play out among MS caregivers.
Wow, that's such an interesting question that unfortunately I don't have as much knowledge of as I'd like. And one of the simple reasons for that is that there aren't very many formal mechanisms that put me in close contact with MS caregivers. One thing that I did as a result of my work researching online support groups is I started a company called eSupport Health, and we now run these online groups for people with MS. Last month, we started running a group for family members and loved ones of people with MS because of the very thing you mentioned, John, that I think it's an unmet need. I've had a lot of family members say to me, Dr. Leavitt, can I make an appointment with you? And the answer is no, you can't. I mean, through my hospital clinic, I have no mechanism for seeing somebody who's not the patient himself or herself. And so where do these folks go? What are the resources out there for them? I want to create some, and that's what we've begun to do.
You mentioned early on in our conversation how cognitive changes can sometimes feel overwhelming. What are some of the first steps that someone with MS can take to enhance their cognitive health by modifying some of the lifestyle factors that we kind of touched on a bit?
So it's a very individualized answer, and it's hard to, what I would do is look at the specific pattern of strengths and weaknesses that I keep mentioning as a sort of general recommendation. One thing that I'm a big proponent of is tracking our own patterns. And this can be very, very simple. Get a little notebook, keep it next to your bed maybe, and make notes in it, maybe in the morning and at night. And notes can be about how well rested do you feel when you wake up? How many hours did you sleep? How many times did you get up and go to the bathroom? How's your mood today? Right? You can create little metrics for yourself, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how fatigued do I feel today? And then you can start to study yourself. I'm a scientist. I want to make a study of everything, right? But you can make a study of yourself. You can have mood, you can track your moods. You might see patterns emerge that help you understand yourself better. And the better you understand yourself, the better you can anticipate things. You can adjust your expectations. You might realize, oh gosh, every day around 2 o'clock, I start to feel kind of depressed, but I also feel really fatigued. Maybe there's a connection. You might just see things hanging together that you never noticed before, and then you can kind of plan for it. Well, if I know that that's going to come on every day, and I don't want to, I know that a lot of folks with MS already know these things about themselves. But if you look a little bit more closely and actually track it like I'm recommending, you might see things that you don't know about yourself, and it could be very useful.
Many of our viewers want to know more about other interventions that might enhance their cognitive health. So let's tackle some of those questions. Are brain games and mobile apps helpful for MS-related cognitive changes?
Uh-oh, I'm getting scared again. Well, here's they're worrisome to me because there's not a sufficient level of evidence. I'm always gonna bring it back to science, but I think that we are all vulnerable because cognition is so intertwined with our very sense of who we are and our identity, as I spoke about at the beginning. And so if somebody purports to have something that's going to preserve our cognition, I think we have to take a step back and say, hang on, I know I'm vulnerable to believe that. I know I want to believe that. I so much want to believe that. And if you see something that's so exciting to you because it looks like a quick answer, I think that's your answer. So I'm very hesitant. I haven't seen anything out there yet. That's not to say that there won't be, but right now, I don't think we're there yet.
What about medications or over-the-counter supplements? Are there any that might help with cognitive function or slow cognitive decline?
So there are some pharmacologic approaches that could have if you have ADHD and you've never known it, which is the case of many, many, many patients who I see for a cognitive evaluation, and we have a way of figuring that out. ADHD is technically something that has to be diagnosed in childhood. But I can tell you that if I'm sitting across from somebody who's about my age, I'll say to them, look, I know that we didn't have this when we were kids, but did you ever think that maybe you had ADHD? So if that's the case, if we end up sort of stumbling on something like that, there are medications that are very effective for some people for that particular issue. And again, then the other thing that I think too is things like depression and anxiety. But there's not yet a pharmacologic treatment for cognition in MS. So outside of these sort of secondary off-label uses of the things that I'm mentioning, we're not quite there yet.
Lila has written in saying that she feels like she's doing everything she can to keep and increase her brain health. Lila says she eats healthy, she's active, says she gets adequate sleep, she plays Sudoku and does crossword puzzles, but Lila feels that she needs something more. Is there anything you might suggest?
Lila ticked most of my boxes. I do like to know how people are spending their time. And yes, crossword puzzles and Sudoku, but I would also want to know that she's engaging socially with others and whether she has any pursuits. I'll tell you that one of the questions a lot of people come to me with is in sort of different various midlife stages. They say, well, I want this evaluation because I want to know if I should take this next step and like get an accreditation or get a certification or go back to grad school or go back and finish my college degree. What do you think of that? And my answer invariably is do it, right? The degree to which we can engage in something that's challenging is going to be so important for our brain health. So maybe Lila can find a new hobby or something to enhance her cognitive flexibility. When we bring in novelty, we're always enhancing our cognitive flexibility, which is the best thing for all of us.
The concept of cognitive reserve is relatively new to MS. Can you explain what that is?
Right. So this is another one that's borrowed from the aging and dementia research, and cognitive reserve is a theory, and it's a very optimistic and hopeful theory that we all have sort of a capacity or a buffer, let's say, that protects us from cognitive decline due to normal aging, disease, insults, and injury. So the idea is that we all have this capacity, this reserve, and we can test that theory by looking at whether engaging in certain things like physical activities and intellectually stimulating activities and changing our diet might confer a benefit for protection against decline. All sort of circling around this idea of, can we build cognitive reserve? Excuse me. And I think that is the exciting part of the theory, is this idea that maybe we can contribute to it. Maybe it can be built up over the lifetime. We actually juxtapose the concept of the theory of cognitive reserve from the theory of brain reserve. The idea being that brain reserve is almost completely dictated by your genetic makeup and your biological stuff. And then cognitive reserve is your sort of area of opportunity. So we published a paper a few years back called Brain Reserve and Cognitive Reserve, What You've Got and How You Use It. And it's a very useful framework for testing various factors to see whether they may actually confer a benefit for protecting our cognition.
Well, you've shared some really important insights with us today, Dr. Leavitt. I'm wondering what you would say are the top 3 takeaways that you'd like our audience to remember.
So I think number 1 is be proactive, right? This is not the time to ignore a signal that your body gives you, that your brain gives you. If something's worrying you, let's check it out. Let's do it together. You don't have to be alone with it. Take it to your doctor, mention it, bring it up, check it out. Don't just Google it. Don't just stay up all night Googling. Don't do that. Bring it to somebody. And this brings me to number 2, which is use your resources well. Actually, an MS neurologist said this to me years ago, and I've never forgotten her words. She said, you always have to use your resources well. And it's a good thing to remind ourselves of, because really, I think that most of us have resources that we're not always using well. So it means reach out to the people around you who can help you. Most people want to be helpful. And so you have to take that step and find the resources that are there and use them well. And I think the third thing I have to say is just be kind to yourself, right? Especially now. This is an incredibly hard time to be a human being in the world. And we all need to acknowledge that and realize that and understand that and not judge ourselves and do the best we can. And it's okay, and be kind to ourselves. And John, if I could just quickly tie in something that I touched on earlier, I think that this moment we're in right now, the global COVID-19 pandemic, is an incredibly interesting opportunity for people with multiple sclerosis, because it's really raising awareness of brain fog. Like, everybody's talking about it all of a sudden. And these articles that I'm reading, it sounds so much like MS, right? When you read about long COVID and people talk about the fatigue and these invisible symptoms, and it takes them out of work, and all of a sudden they have debilitating cognitive brain fog, I'm sort of struck. I'm like, oh my gosh. So folks with MS no longer have to feel all alone, like nobody's going to understand what they're talking about. There's a whole bunch of people who, unfortunately, suddenly get it, like really get it. And I think that's an exciting opportunity. And we have to think carefully about how we can sort of use that momentum to shed light on the cognitive changes that come with MS.
Well, thank you for sharing your expertise with us. Now I'd like to take a few more questions that our audience has for you. Speaking of brain fog, Ryan says he seems to be experiencing brain fog lately and is wondering what are some good ways to deal with brain fog and stay focused.
There would be a series of questions that I want. Was it Ryan or Brian?
Ryan.
Ryan, I'd want to know, I'd want to tick off a few boxes first to know whether, Ryan's sleep is disrupted. Sleep is so incredibly important. Everything kind of follows from a good night's sleep or a bad night's sleep. So that would be number one on my list. Then I'd want to go through all the different, the mood issues and actually, I'll just bring this up right now. It's hard for us as human beings to say, I'm depressed. And I would argue that it's even harder for men than women. I think men have more limited options. And I would even say that in men, depression actually, it presents differently. And sometimes in women, depression can present not as sad and weepy, but as irritable, extra angry, right? And I can't really attribute this to anything, but I just feel really snappy and short today. And I think that it's important to understand that this is a physiological state. Your body is experiencing something. Your mind is filling in and coming up with reasons for maybe why, but it's a physiological state and it has to be considered and dealt with, and it can be treated. So it's not something to shy away from. Unfortunately, we have a lot of societal bias against addressing those mood issues, but I'd want to talk to Ryan about that and all the sort of other things that could be contributing to his brain fog so that we can weed through that and then see what we're left with at the end.
Aisha is asking how to tell if cognitive decline is from MS or from getting older, or is it dementia, possibly Alzheimer's?
Right, and this is what our tools are really designed to help us do in the clinic. They really help us identify patterns that are more consistent with one versus the other. And of course, there can be overlap, and it's not a clear picture always. Going back to what I said before about the idea, is this aging, is this MS, or is this just in my head? Like, it's definitely a combination of all of those things, because all of those things make us the complicated, messy human beings that we are.
Victor wants to know if MS impacts both short-term and long-term memory.
So it can, it definitely can. And the degree to which it affects one or the other can be really important for us to understand and disentangle. And that would be another reason to come for a neuropsych evaluation, because they could point to they could point to different causes and different consequences. They could give us ideas about future trajectories. Just it's important to sort of really, again, know that specific profile.
Carla wants to know, how do you know when it's time to give up driving because of cognitive decline?
This is such a hard one. I will say it's incredibly hard to tell a person that they should stop driving. You're taking away a lot of independence. And we all, mothers, brothers, sisters, friends, spouses, doctors, try to avoid saying to somebody, this is the time. But one thing that I say to families and patients, if this comes up, is you have to ask yourself one question. What has to happen for me to make that decision? Am I waiting for something catastrophic to happen? Let's not get to that point, right? If we can see the writing on the wall, and this comes to a point of like asking people around you, right? You want to pull in your resources and say, what do you think? Am I safe to drive? All that said, there are some places where you can get a driving evaluation, and those places are worth their weight in gold. They're few and far between. So, in a lot of cases, you might be on your own, relying on your doctor's recommendation, your family and your friends, and just asking yourself, what has to happen for me to make this decision?
And Charlie wants to know how to find cognitive therapists that specialize in MS.
That can be really difficult. I think one of the best sources, and I'm not just saying this, but the MS Society has such a wonderful way of connecting people to resources. So that would be the first place I would recommend that people go. You can ask your doctor. I don't know geographically right outside in the entire United States what kinds of resources exist, but I would just go back to the MS Society because they know. They know the most.
Well, I want to thank all of you who have submitted your questions, and thank you, Dr. Leavitt, for being with us today.
Thank you, John.
I think that one of the best things that anyone can do for themselves, especially during these uncertain times, is to make sure that the information they're getting is credible and reliable. So we'd like to share some resources with you, and these are the resources that you can count on. I want to remind you that the National MS Society's MS Navigator team is your best partner when it comes to connecting you to the very best information and resources on living with MS. You can reach an MS Navigator by phone, email, or through the Society's website by chat. And I'll also remind you that the MS Society brings people together through peer connection programs like self-help groups, the MS Friends Helpline and Paired Program, and the MS Society's Facebook community. To learn more, please visit the MS Society's website at nationalmssociety.org. For more information about cognition and MS, please visit the National MS Society's website at nationalmssociety.org/cognition. Every week on the Real Talk MS podcast, I continue the conversation that we start here. So I hope you'll take a few minutes and give Real Talk MS a listen. You'll find the Real Talk MS podcast at realtalkms.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. And Walk MS 2021 is coming, and this year, Walk MS will meet you where you are to connect, celebrate, and make a difference like never before. For more information, please visit walkms.org. You can connect with the National MS Society along with others affected by MS on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I encourage you to like the posts, subscribe to those channels, and make sure that you're on the Society's mailing list so you'll continue to receive the latest information on MS and updates on upcoming programs like this one. I'd like to thank Dr. Victoria Leavitt for joining us today, and I'd like to thank everyone who's joined us with your great questions. Please remember that a recording of this webinar is going to be available at the Society's website at nationalmssociety.org/MSexpert, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. I hope you'll join us for next Friday's edition of For Ask an MS Expert, when we'll be talking about effective strategies for living well with progressive MS and learning about the latest efforts that are driving advancements in progressive MS research. And now I have a favor to ask each of you. Getting your feedback on today's webinar is important. So you'll see a survey pop up in a moment when we close out the webinar. And if you're watching on Facebook Live, you'll see a link to that survey pinned to the comments section. On YouTube, you'll find that link in the program description. Completing the survey makes a real difference. The information you provide helps us continuously improve, and it helps shape future programs. The survey takes just 1 minute, so I hope you'll take a minute and please fill it out. On behalf of Dr. Victoria Leavitt and the National MS Society, I want to thank you once again for joining us. Please stay safe and make healthy choices.